I corrected a duke in front of his guests, and in that single moment of defiance, I sealed my fate forever. What I did not know then was that fate has two faces. One of them would almost destroy me. The other would teach me how to live and how to love all over again. My name is Eleanor Ashford, and I was not always a maid. There was a time when I sat in a sunlit study in Cambridge, my fingers moving slowly across the pages of Homer, while my father read aloud in Greek. His voice rose and fell like music, steady and sure. He was Professor William Ashford, a brilliant man whose mind was vast, but whose purse was painfully small. He loved me with a devotion so complete that I only understood its depth after it was gone. My mother died bringing me into this world, so my father became everything. He taught me Latin before I learned how to braid my hair. He taught me French while other girls practiced needlework. He gave me languages the way other fathers gave their daughters dowries, believing, perhaps foolishly, that knowledge would be enough to protect me. But knowledge does not pay debts. One gray November morning, my father collapsed at his desk. His heart, worn down by years of worry and work, simply stopped. When he died, he left me his books, his spectacles, and a mountain of unpaid bills. The men who came to collect what he owed showed no mercy. They carried away the furniture my mother had chosen, the piano she once played, and the books my father had spent his life gathering. I stood in the doorway and watched my entire world disappear into wooden crates. When they were finished, the house was hollow. I was 23 years old, alone, and penniless. All I owned was the dress on my back and a small leather bag hidden beneath my skirts. Inside it were my father's spectacles, a lock of my mother's hair, and a worn copy of Virgil's Aeneid. The world had no place for a woman with an education and no fortune. So, I did the unthinkable. I became a servant. I will not pretend it was easy. The hands that once turned pages now scrubbed floors. The voice that debated philosophy now answered only yes, ma'am, and no, sir. I learned to keep my eyes lowered and my thoughts hidden. I learned that to the aristocracy, servants were not people. We were moving furniture. I worked in 3 houses in 2 years. One dismissed me when the lady discovered I could read better than her daughter. Another let me go after a financial scandal. The third was kind, but the mistress died, and her son replaced the staff. Each time, the ground beneath me felt thinner. Then came Ashworth Manor. The journey to Yorkshire took 3 long days. Rain soaked the roads, and the land grew wilder the farther north we traveled. When I first saw the manor, it stood on a hill like a silent watcher, its towers cutting into the gray sky. Ashworth Manor was beautiful and lonely. Long corridors echoed with footsteps. Portraits of dead ancestors watched from the walls. Silence lived there, deep and heavy. The Duke of Ashworth was Theodore Ashworth, 31 years old, widowed, and spoken of in whispers. He had loved his wife deeply, they said. After her death, he withdrew from the world and buried himself in books. I saw him for the first time on my 3rd day. I entered the library believing it empty. Instead, he stood by the window, tall and still, holding a book. When he turned and looked at me, his eyes passed through me as if I were glass. "You are the new maid," he said. "Yes, Your Grace." "What is your name?" "Eleanor Ashford." "Ashford," he repeated, as if testing it. "An unusual name for a maid." "It was my father's name, Your Grace." It was a schoolteacher. It was a lie I had learned to tell well. He dismissed me without another word. For weeks, I avoided him. I cleaned the library only when he was absent. Sometimes, when I was alone, I opened a book and read a few lines, just to remember who I used to be. Then came the dinner. The Duke hosted 3 old friends from his university days. They were loud, confident men, filled with wine and arrogance. I was sent to light the fire in the library before they arrived. I was still kneeling at the hearth when the door opened. The Duke entered with his guests. One of them laughed. "And who is this pretty little thing?" I curtsied, my face burning. "I am just a maid, sir." "Can she read?" another asked, already amused. "Yes," I said quietly. Laughter followed. "Can you read Latin, girl?" The Duke intervened, his voice cold. "Leave her alone," It was pity, not respect. Then one of the guests turned to the Duke with a smirk. "You misquoted Virgil at dinner." They argued about the Latin. The guest was wrong. The Duke was right. I should have stayed silent, but my father's voice filled my head. "Never let ignorance win." "If I may, sir," I said. Every face turned toward me. "The Duke's Latin was correct," I said, my hands trembling. "The emphasis falls on the penultimate syllable, and the original line uses the classical I, not the medieval J." Silence fell like a blade. The guest's face turned red. The Duke stared at me as if I had struck him. I curtsied and fled the room. The next morning, the summons came. "The Duke wishes to see you," the housekeeper said. I walked to the library knowing my life was about to change. The Duke stood by the window again. "Where did you learn Latin?" he asked. "My father," I said. "He was a professor at Cambridge." He turned, surprise clear in his eyes. "A professor's daughter," he said slowly. "Scrubbing floors in my house." I had no choice. He studied me in silence. Then he said something I never expected. I was not offended. I was impressed. He laughed softly. "Edward has been unbearable for years. Watching you correct him was satisfying." I stared, stunned. Then he spoke again. "I need a librarian." The world tilted. He offered me books, wages, and a room of my own. He asked only for my mind. I set my conditions. Respect. Freedom. Safety. He agreed, and so without knowing it, I stepped onto a path that would change everything. Because the Duke who mocked his maid did not yet realize that the woman standing before him would soon become the one thing he never expected, his equal. My new position changed everything, and yet nothing at all. I moved from the servants' quarters to a small room in the east wing, one with a narrow window that looked over the gardens, and a fireplace that held back the Yorkshire cold. It was not grand, but it was mine. For the first time since my father died, I slept without listening for footsteps in the hall, or fearing that tomorrow I would be dismissed and turned out. The servants did not know what to make of me. I was no longer one of them, but I was not their mistress either. Some watched me with curiosity, others with suspicion. Mrs. Blackwood said nothing, but her sharp eyes missed very little. I knew she was measuring me, deciding whether I was a problem she would have to manage. The library became my world. It was vast, stretching upward with shelves that seemed to reach the ceiling. Ladders rolled along rails, and the scent of old paper and leather wrapped around me like a familiar embrace. I cataloged each book carefully, writing titles and languages, noting damaged spines and fragile pages. It was slow work, but it filled a hollow place inside me. The Duke came every afternoon. At first, we worked in silence. He sat at his desk reading while I climbed ladders and wrote notes. The only sounds were turning pages and scratching pens. But silence does not stay silent forever. It began with small questions. "How would you translate this passage?" he asked one day, holding up a Greek text. I answered. He nodded, then asked another. Soon the questions turned into discussions. Discussions turned into debates. We argued about philosophy, about poetry, about which Roman poet had the sharper mind. He preferred order and structure. I favored emotion and beauty. "You argue like a scholar," he said once, watching me closely. "I was raised by one," I replied. The way he looked at me changed slowly. The cold distance faded. In its place came curiosity, then respect, then something more difficult to name. We shared tea in the afternoons, passing the cup without ceremony. I read aloud when his eyes grew tired, my voice filling the quiet room. He listened with his eyes closed, his face unguarded. Those moments felt dangerous. I told myself again and again that this was gratitude, nothing more. I had been starved of intellectual companionship for years. Of course, I felt drawn to the one person who saw me. But gratitude does not make your heart race when someone enters a room. The Duke was not always present. Some days, he did not come at all. Mrs. Blackwood would say he was indisposed. On those days, the house felt colder. I would catch him later, standing before a portrait of his late wife, his expression unreadable. Her presence lingered everywhere. In the flowers arranged just so, in the books she had chosen, in the silence that followed his laughter. I did not ask about her. Then came the night everything changed. We had been working late, the candles burned low, and the fire was little more than glowing embers. Outside, snow pressed against the windows, soft and relentless. "It is late," I said, standing. "I should go." "Stay," he said quietly, "just for a moment." I stayed. He spoke of his wife then, of her laughter, her warmth, the way she filled rooms with light. He spoke of holding her hand as fever took her away, of waking alone the next morning to a world that no longer made sense. I listened, my chest tight. "I locked myself away after she died," he said. "I told myself I would never love again." He looked at me then, truly looked at me. "And then you corrected my Latin." The air shifted. He spoke of loneliness, of wanting conversation, of wanting to feel alive again. When he said my name, it sounded different on his lips. He told me he loved me. I should have fled. Instead, I told him the truth. That I loved him too. His kiss was gentle, unsure, as if he feared I might vanish. When he asked me to marry him, my world shattered and reformed all at once. "Yes," I said, though fear trembled beneath the joy. The scandal was immediate. Servants whispered. Letters flew. London took notice. The Dowager Duchess arrived like a storm. She looked at me as if I were an object that had somehow wandered into the wrong room. Her words were sharp, her disapproval clear. "You will never be accepted," she said. I told her I understood the cost. She left without offering approval, but she did not forbid the marriage. That alone felt like a small miracle. Preparations began. I was fitted for gowns I had never imagined wearing. I learned to walk into rooms without shrinking. Lady Ashworth drilled me in manners with relentless precision. She did not soften, but she did not push me away either. "You will not embarrass this family," she said. "You will be flawless." The wedding day arrived with spring sunlight and roses in bloom. The Duke waited at the altar. His eyes bright with emotion he did not try to hide. When he took my hands, they were warm and steady. "I choose you," he whispered. The vows were spoken. The ring was placed. The world watched as a maid became a duchess. I felt only peace. But happiness does not end struggle. Society did not forget my past. Invitations disappeared. Smiles were thin. Compliments carried hidden edges. The Duke stood beside me always. When I faltered, he reminded me that I belonged. "You are my equal," he said. "No one gets to take that from you." Slowly, the whispers softened. Some accepted me. Others never would. And yet, in the quiet moments, in the library where it all began, I knew one truth beyond doubt. I had spoken when I was expected to be silent, and in doing so I had changed not only my fate, but his. The final cost of that defiance had not yet been paid, and the greatest test of our love still waited ahead. Marriage did not quiet the world. It challenged it. The first year as Duchess of Ashworth felt like walking across thin ice. Every step was measured. Every word weighed. I learned quickly that society never forgot origins. It only pretended to. At dinners, conversations paused when I entered. At gatherings, I was greeted politely, then excluded gently. Invitations arrived late or not at all. Smiles came with sharp edges hidden beneath silk gloves. I bore it in silence. I had survived hunger, grief, and invisibility. I would survive whispers. Theodore never allowed me to face it alone. He stood beside me in every room, his hand steady at my back, his voice calm but unyielding. "She is my wife," he told anyone who questioned him. That is the end of the matter. But even love has limits when tested by the world. The true trial came not from gossip, but from duty. The Ashworth estate was vast. Farms, tenants, workers, accounts, obligations that stretched back generations. I had known labor as a maid, but this was a different weight entirely. Every decision affected hundreds of lives. I studied late into the night. Ledgers replaced poetry. Correspondence replaced translations. Mrs. Blackwood became my greatest ally, guiding me without judgment. "You listen," she said once. "That is why you will succeed. Mistakes were made, crops failed one season." A tenant accused the estate of unfair rents. A steward questioned my authority openly. I did not raise my voice. I listened. I learned. Slowly, respect replaced doubt. The turning point came during a winter so harsh it froze the rivers solid. Food ran short. Workers fell ill. Panic spread through the villages surrounding the estate. Tradition said supplies should be preserved for the manor first. I refused. We opened the stores. Grain was distributed. Wood was given freely. The manor burned colder so others could survive. There was outrage among certain relatives. Letters arrived filled with warnings and condemnation. Theodore stood with me. "If this house stands while our people starve," he said, "then it deserves to fall." Spring came late that year. But it came. When it did, something had changed. People bowed to me not because of my title, but because they trusted me. Society noticed. The whisper shifted. "The Duchess is strange," they said. The Duchess is different. The Duchess is formidable. Lady Ashworth watched it all in silence. One evening, nearly 2 years after my wedding, she found me alone in the library. "You have done what I did not think possible," she said. "You made them respect you." "I did not mean to," I replied. She studied me carefully. Meaning to has never been the point. From that night on, she called me daughter. Years passed. The library grew. Scholars visited. Conversations filled rooms once hollow with grief. Theodore laughed more easily. The house breathed again. We restored Catherine's old sitting room together. I expected pain. Instead, I found peace. Her presence no longer haunted the halls. It lived gently within them, honored, not feared. Love did not erase love. It made space for it. We traveled when we could. Rome, Paris, Athens. We stood among ruins and spoke of time, of endurance, of the strange ways history folds back on itself. "You were born for this," Theodore said once, watching me speak with a group of scholars. "Not this title, but this life." I smiled. "I was born for words," I said. Everything else followed. The years softened us. Hair grayed. Hands aged. Love deepened into something quieter and stronger. We lost Lady Ashworth on a calm autumn morning. She passed peacefully, her final words a reminder to never bow to small minds. I wept for her as I had never expected to. Theodore held me as I once held him. Time moved on. I began writing. Not for fame, not for history, but to remember. I wrote of my father, of his lessons and quiet faith in me. I wrote of floors scrubbed and words hidden. I wrote of a duke who mocked, then listened, then loved. The worn copy of Virgil's Aeneid still rests in our library, protected behind glass. The book that began it all. Now, as age bends my spine and silver threads my hair, I sit by the fire and watch Theodore read. He still reads aloud sometimes, as if afraid the words might escape him if left alone. "I love you," he says, as he always does. "I know," I reply. "I corrected your Latin." He laughs, and the sound still fills the room. Outside, snow falls softly. Inside, there is warmth. This is not a fairy tale. It is something braver. It is a story about speaking when silence is expected, about refusing to be small, about love that does not ask permission, and about how one corrected sentence can change an entire life. If this story remains when I am gone, let it be a reminder that minds are not born to kneel, that love does not belong to rank, and that sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that speaks the truth.